Well, it's part 4 of the Snowdrop Satchel, and I tell you, some days I feel like I shouldn't have gotten up, but nothing but technical difficulties. Today I am going to apologize in advance. The sound on this is going to be terrible. I had some glitches and some technical difficulties, and my other recorder stopped, so I had to use my camera or rely on the camera recorder. Otherwise I had to voice over everything, and I don't think I could do that. So anyway, bear with me on that one. Where we're going to get to is the lining, getting all of the lining all put in, and I have it sewn. I'm ready to top stitch. So I'm going to leave it today at that, and get my technical stuff all figured out, and I'll finish it up. So again, yeah, that's all we have left is the top stitching and to put the straps on, and just to do some minor hardware stuff. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and again, in advance, I apologize for the sound quality.
To get started with doing the lining, this is the first piece that I'm going to be using. Now this is the additional piece. This is the zipper facing for the inside pocket, or the inside pocket facing, I guess. So this, if you went by my cutting chart, this was an extra piece. This is 10 inches by 2.5 inches. So what we're going to start with is, this is a different method, I guess, for doing a finished pocket, so that on the inside you don't see any raw edges of your zipper tape. So, and again, this is not in Celine's instructions, but it is in her new patterns and stuff. So this is how I prefer to move forward. It just is a much more finished, professional look to it. So I'm just going to mark. Now this is 2.5 inches. I'm going to be using number 5 zipper tape. You can use number 3 as well for your inside. It's a personal preference. I don't mind the chunkier look of having a different zipper inside, or a heavier zipper. So what I'm going to start off with, I'm going to measure in from each edge all the way around, and I'm just going to mark, I'm going to make a box in the center. So this box, you should have a 1/2 inch left in between here, and this box is going to form our stitching line. Going back to this facing for just a moment, you can do this with any pattern that has an inside zip pocket. And the rule of thumb that I use is always 2.5 inches, and because 2.5 inches, putting an inch on each edge, or inward an inch, oh boy, will always leave me a 1/2 inch in here. So if this is my, that's hard to see this way, this is one of my inside pocket pieces. This is 10 inches wide. So it doesn't matter, whatever size my pocket piece is going to be, that's going to be the width of my facing as well. So if this was 11 inches wide, so was my facing, by 2.5 inches. So this is where we're going to start. Now I have one piece of my main panel of my lining. We're going to position this so that it's an inch down from the top, from 2 inches from the top edge, or an inch from this corner, either 2 inches from here or an inch from here. It doesn't matter. I use my corners. So I'm going to go an inch down, and I'm going to make sure that it's centered. So if that means folding this in half and marking my center, that's what I'll do. So I've just got a little bit of a mark there. And now I can go back to using pins because I'm using fabric. So I'm just going to pin this in place. And I'm going to just do my stitching line all the way. I'm just going to follow this box as closely as I can. One thing to watch for is make sure that when you get to your corners that you don't overshoot your corner. Stitch only to there, even if it means you have to lift up your needle and reposition it so that you've gotten right to that corner, and all the way down just to the corner each way. Another little trick that I do, I don't like to back stitch. I don't want the bulk in my seams, so I would maybe start about here. I'm just going to move you in a little bit closer here. So I would maybe start here, sew all the way around, and then come back and just stitch over a few stitches just so that that is all tacked in there. All right, so I've just gone ahead and I've sewn all the way around, and I've made sure that my corners that I haven't overshot and come back. That's important for when we turn it out, that those little extra stitches will cause our corners to pucker and that kind of thing. So we want a very nice even box. And there's going to be about 1,008 different suggestions for cutting this box. Now you can mark it if you want. Lots of people, you can mark the center here. And again, this is where there's lots of different techniques, and use what works for you. This is what works for me. I have no problems with this. Some people will tell you to start back really far, and when you're going to cut this V, some will say not to stitch here. There's many methods. This is what works for me. So I'm going to stay back, but I'm not too worried about it because I'm going to finish off with my scissors. But I'm going to start off with my rotary cutter, just kind of giving most of it. And just for the sake so that you can see, I'm just going to make a V here because that's what I'm going to cut my V. So I'm going to cut into to that point, then I'm going to come and I'm going to cut the rest. Now this is where I love these little scissors. These are my little Kai scissors, and they are sharp right to the very point. So what I have found, and I have in classes, I have corrected or helped people out with their problems where when they've turned their facing, they've got puckers, and all I do is I clip just a little bit more for them, and that seems to take it away. So we're going to get right into the very, very corner. We're going to get as close to that stitching as we possibly can without actually cutting the stitching. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So now this is going to get turned. Now what I find for myself, again, the easiest thing for me to do, like getting this thing turned through, it always wants to turn back the other way, and it's just, it feels like I have about 13 fingers at a time trying to get that thing turned around, and it just doesn't want to go. What I have found works for me is if I take this to my iron and press this side up and press this side, then turn it, part of it is at least pressed a little bit. So once I've done a press on each side, this is what I end up with. And I can turn this over and pull this through. And yes, it still wants to turn out, but not quite as bad. So now I can do my fine tuning. I can go back to my ironing board, and I really only have one more seam, or one more side really, that needs to be pressed. So I'll just do that on both of these sides. So now I have it all pressed, and you can see I don't have puckers or anything there. Just by getting into that corner really well, it seems to hold off on those little puckers. People don't like that. Okay, so I'm just going to set this aside, and the next thing that I'm going to continue on with is I'm going to sew my zipper in. So for this, I'm going to need my 2 pocket pieces. Now, one of these pocket pieces, I'm going to cut 1 inch off of. So I'm going to make it 1 inch shorter than the other. So we've cut 1 inch off of one of these pocket pieces. The next thing that we're going to do is fold up a 1/2 inch on each, just on one edge of the long edge of each of these 2 pieces. And again, if it makes it easier for pressing, to make sure that you have a nice even 1/2 inch seam or 1/2 inch hem, you can mark 1 inch, fold up to that mark, and you've got 1/2 inch. So I've got my bottoms pressed, and I'm going to set aside the longer one. So the larger piece I'm going to set aside for now. So I have my small piece, my short piece I guess I should call it. I'm going to flip this over so that it's right side facing up. Now just trust me on this. It's going to seem really confusing because you're putting the zipper face up on the right side, or up again, you got right sides again, wrong sides, all kinds of stuff. Trust me, it will work. Now again, going back, I use zipper tape, so I just cut my zipper tape the same width. I can trim it off after. For this, you're going to have an 8-inch zipper if you have a prepared zipper. So you're going to just center this in here. You may have a little bit of a gap on each edge. No big deal at all. So I use zipper tape, as I've said. I like to leave everything closed if I can, just a personal preference. In order to get your finished zipper, when you're all done, if you want your zipper to open from the left to the right, which is generally accepted, this is where it's going to be backwards and weird. We're going to place our zipper so that the zipper is facing us, also the right side is facing up. And it seems like we should be sewing it this way, but that is not the correct way. So we're going to start off, we're going to place this here. If this was open, like my zipper right now is facing to the right, again, that seems backwards because it would zip up to the right now, where I want it to zip up to the left. But again, you just have to trust me on this. So now this I can just pin in place. And I have a hump here where my zipper is, where my pull is, but that's okay. I'll be moving my pull out of the way. So I have this pinned in place. I'm going to sew this down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to sew all the way along. Now, when I get where my presser foot is close to this, I'm just going to move my zipper pull out of the way. Then this will fall into place without that bump there. It'll stay nice and flat and straight. So now I have my zipper sewn in. I'm going to fold this over and I'm going to press toward my lining. I don't want this pressed up toward my zipper. Make sure that you press all of this, and be careful. If you're using a plastic zipper, you don't want to apply too much heat to this. So I guess just use a little caution and be careful. And here I have it pressed and ready to go. Now I'm going to go get my larger piece and I'm going to place it face up. Now my shorter assembled piece is going to be right side down, and I'm going to line this up and I'm going to stitch it as well. So here I have my second piece sewn on. I have it as well pressed to my lining side. So this is what I end up with, and it looks kind of all backwards and weird, but it's going to be fine, I promise. This is where I like to use some double-sided tape. Zippers, especially for me, I find that double-sided tape is just really works amazing. Now this is just a 1/4 inch tape. I'm going to keep it back a little ways from the very edge. Then there's no chance of, when this is turned the right way, there's no chance that I've got any tape inside my seam allowance. So I'm going to do this on the top and the bottom. And you can pin this in instead if you want. Again, it's just personal preference, whatever works for you. Now my shorter piece is on the bottom here. I'm going to start by lining up my edge here, and I'm going to center my zipper in here. And all I'm using kind of is I want to make sure that this is straight as opposed to ending up being a little bit bowed. It can very easily tend to bow there. And there are some kind of lines that you can see in your zipper. And I just use those lines as a reference point. And if I want to, I can also pin if I'm unsure whether my tape is going to hold for me or not. There I go. So this is just a little bit different of a method than the one I did another video on it a while ago, because at the time that was the best method that I had learned. Again, I also learned that from one of Blue Calla Patterns instructions. That was kind of a two-step process. So you would have done the bottom, sewn that in, then put the top on, sewn that in. This way, we actually can just go all the way around. So I'm going to top stitch this at about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to stay back about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Again, I'm going to do the same thing as when I sewed the hole. I'm going to start, I probably won't go back here and all the way around, probably start at a corner, or I can start here, go up all the way across, back down, come across, and then go back up, instead of back stitching and then going. So now I have my top stitching done all the way around. I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to take my top, fold it back down, and I'm going to line up my bottom. Now this, when I pin or clip it, it's going to be left, I'm not going to pin it to my main body. I want this all on its own. We're not going to sew across the bottom here. This is how we're going to turn the bag. The final step, or one of the final steps. So I'll clip that together. Going to just line up my edges, press that down, because you're going to end up with, we've pressed it one way, but we've got top stitching. I'll trim those off as well. So once I get this clipped, actually I could top stitch it now, or sorry, press it now if I really wanted to. It's not that important. I'm just going to clip this all the way along. Now, then I'm going to just sew down here, and then I'm done with my inside pocket. My preferred method of doing this is when I'm at my machine, I like to just roll this over to one side, and so I very often will do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, 3/8, whatever you feel like doing. Again, just as long as it's consistent, and you can sew over that facing and everything if you want. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And then once I give that just a little bit of a press on the top here, then it'll be done. And so now I've got this pressed, I've got my seams sewn here, and when I open this up, lo and behold, it's all finished. It looks really pretty. There's no raw edges showing anywhere. It's all good. And it opens the proper way, from left to right it opens up. So I'm going to set this aside for a moment, and I'm going to move on to the optional slip pockets. So I have two pieces like this. I love the versatility and the organization that I can do in the Snowdrop bag. To me, this is a great and easy way of adding to the bag. Now, before I get started, something that was brought up to me, Celine actually let me know, the measurement that I had given you for your slip pocket, she found it a little bit too narrow, and you can cut a little bit wider if you want. Now, the reason why is because I've done so many of these snowdrops. It is a really big custom seller for me, I've actually altered my pattern. So I have narrowed my actual pattern piece to allow for making the lining just a little bit smaller. Now that is how I arrived at that, is just by my personal preference and what I found worked for me. Very important, do not change the width of the top of the bag. If you want to narrow so that the inside of the bag is a little bit smaller than the outside, do not, and I just can't even stress enough, because when you go to sew it into the bag, if this is smaller, it won't fit in the top. But you can taper it down. Now, in lots of instructions, they will suggest that you taper your lining so that the lining isn't so big. And you'll often go from a 3/8 inch to 1/2 inch, 5/8, whatever it is you choose. So I keep forgetting to do that with this pattern, so I have altered my pattern so that I know I'm going to do a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So again, that's just what works for me. But I'll emphasize one more time, I have not changed anything at the top here with the width. I've only tapered maybe from 1 inch or 2 down. I've tapered this part and just adjusted my pattern piece. So that's why mine fits in. If your pattern piece is the full width, then the measurements that I gave you, it's going to seem a little bit too narrow. It will still work. You can make it work, because you'll probably end up tapering your lining as well. So that's just to explain what's coming up. So I have 2 of these because I'm going to do one slip pocket on each side. I'm going to take them both and I'm just going to sew this bottom seam. Now we've only sewn this one long seam. You want to leave your sides open. And here, it does make it a little bit easier to do this. You can fold this up and just press it toward the top if you'd like. Both pieces. Sometimes it makes it easier. What we're going to do is we're just going to turn these tubes right side out. We're going to try to. There we go. And then I'm just going to press both edges so that I have just a nice flat rectangle. I'm going to do that with both of them. So this is what I end up with. I've got 2 tubes, rectangles now, that are ready to be sewn into my lining, and we're going to partition them off a little bit, your choice, to make the slip pockets. So I'm going to grab, again, none of this is in the instructions because she hasn't included slip pockets in the instructions. But this is what I do to my custom bags. So now the reference marks or reference point I'm using is this little notch in the lining, this little jog there. I'm going to set my ruler so that I've got 3/4 of an inch, so that bottom, that little notch, sits at 3/4 of an inch. Then I know it's straight. You can top stitch this as well. And actually I'm going to do that. You'll only need to top stitch one edge, because the only other thing that gets done here is we're going to sew it on with our bottom edge. Now make sure that when we sew this bottom part on, that we shouldn't anyway, but make sure you get your pocket out of the way. And then you can just pin this down or clip it whatever. So I'm going to sew along the bottom. That's going to form the bottom of my pocket. And actually, I'll do this on the other one. This one is ready to go. I'm ready at least to sew this part. I haven't partitioned anything, but it'll be easier to show on this one. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. Set my ruler at 3/4 of an inch. You can draw a line. You can do whatever you want. And again, this one, once I have it pinned down, I'm ready to top stitch this one as well. Now the next thing that I want to consider is how to partition. I don't want one great big huge pocket in my bag, because then it's just a big junky pocket. This is where you get to decide what you want to do. We're ready to partition this off, and you can decide what you want to do. Now, my last bag, I didn't do the exact same thing as I've done with some of my other ones, or with my last one, and then I missed it. I wanted a pocket for my reading glasses, because now I have to carry them with me all the time. But anyway, so I know that I have a bit of a seam allowance over on this edge. I'm just lining up my ruler here. I'm just lining up along the edge, and I'm going to use my air erase marker. And I know that this is going to be a straight line here. I'm going to allow for, let me see here. Let's go 2.5 inches for my glasses. And then on the other side, I'm just marking this just more for reference than anything. I don't actually need to sew this seam right here if I don't want to. And then I'm going to just kind of divide this somewhere in half. So that's about 10 inches. So I'm going to go about 5 inches. Again, this isn't rocket science. It doesn't matter exactly. And you can figure out for yourself. Maybe you have sunglasses that you always like to carry, and you need a little bit wider pocket. I find going on the edge or on the side is a nice place, because it kind of keeps them out of the way and out of the line of fire of putting the rest of your stuff in your bag. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. And again, I'm going to have to be really careful when I go to this one, because I don't want to sew through my pocket. When I sew those lines, I need to have that pocket out of the way. So I'll be sewing across the bottom. And then, now this one, I kind of like, this is going to be, when I look in my bag, this is going to be what looks back at me, what I see first. So I like to put my Doodlebug pens in my custom purses. So I sew about a 1-inch pocket right in the center, so that can slide in there. Now, one thing I've found is if that pen slips all the way to the bottom, it's very hard to get out. So not only do I sew down the sides here, I sew a little piece across the bottom. So if I sew down and then go across, it keeps that pen from pushing all the way down. Again, you can customize it to anything that you want. One thing to consider is don't make your pockets too small, because will you be able to get your hand into them? Now I have my everything sewn. You can kind of see my stitching goes down here, and my pen fits in that one. And on this other one, now I did sew down straight down here. I just want this pocket nice and straight, but my reading glasses just fit in there nicely now. Probably my cell phone, if I wanted to put my cell phone in there. I have a fairly big case for mine, looks like a little book. But yep, that fits in there too. However you want to personalize your linings. That's the nice thing about having a slip pocket that goes all the way across, as to just a small little slip pocket sewn onto it. So that is that part of it. Now I can and will trim off this side. I'm just going to use the main panel as my reference. And you may or may not have much to trim off. There we go. So the next thing that we're gonna work on is our sides. I'm gonna line up the bottom notch here. And there is a slight curve as well to this, so I'm just gonna curve this around. Now, as you can see, my top doesn't line up. That's okay, not gonna hurt anything. I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to sew both of these, and then I'm going to press and do the other side. So when it comes to pressing, this is my side seam. Do this a little bit differently. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to press this first. And I also have my the seam allowance, my pocket is in there as well. So I just have to get that out of the way. I'm going to press that first. So now it's pressed open. Well, when this is all put together, I actually want it to be like a box, but I don't want my seam allowances to be bulky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten everything out as much as I can. So that means opening this seam up, pressing it, then I'm actually going to fold it back on itself. So I have one seam allowance here and one on the back. And by doing that, I get a very crisp corner, but it's also crisp this way as well, or as crisp as it's going to be possible. So if I do this all in the right order, I don't have everything boxed in together. I only have to do one seam when everything is sewn together. So I have, basically I just have this long piece right now. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to do this last, well, I guess it's the second last seam. And then I just have this one last one to do. And then if I have as much stuff flat as possible, opened up and out of the way, it's a lot easier to do this. So I just have the one, and again, I may have to use my tailor ham or something like that just to be able to manipulate it and get that seam folded back as well. So now I have all my side seams all sewn together, and the next one I'm going to do is my bottom. So I'm just going to line this up, and again 3/8 inch seam allowance. When you were doing your side seams here, again, because I altered my pattern, I don't have to worry about tapering, but you may have wanted to start tapering about 1.5 inches to 2 inches down, and then just give yourself a bigger seam allowance just so things fit in a little bit tighter. So I'm just going to do a 3/8 inch seam allowance just across the bottom here, and I'm going to leave these little corners open for now. So we have this bottom seam done. Now, and this is kind of well, I don't know, sometimes I find it a little bit awkward, but it always seems to work out. I'm going to sew these box corners. And this is a matter of getting everything just flattened out. Sometimes it takes a little bit of poking and manipulating just to get things to lay where they're supposed to. And again, I think this one is actually a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this. Oh, and I told you wrong. And I think here again I have made the allowance. This should have been a 1/2 inch seam allowance. As well as this will be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I've got both of these corners done, and I'm going to press. I'm going to take these corners and I'm going to press this down on both sides so that my bottom is not so my bottom's not rounded. Oh man, okay, sorry, I'm cracking myself up here. So I want these edges to be nice and squared off so that it stands up by itself. All my corners are just as nice and crisp as I possibly can get them. As well, I'm going to take this, and this is again personal preference, and I'm going to fold the whole thing over toward the bottom, and I'm going to give it a really good press so that this seam allowance is underneath. I don't know why. I have no reasoning for it. It just makes sense to me for some reason. And so there I have my lining is all ready to go in. Everything nice, sharp, crisp, and it's ready to go in. So here is the outside of my bag, and something has to get turned around here because I can't have both of them with the right sides. Now my choice is to put my lining inside of the outside, the exterior. So I'm going to have to turn this out, even though it's all nice and crisp and stuff. I'm not going to poke my corners out and all of that kind of stuff. All I'm going to do is just get this turned. I'm just going to leave those corners loose. I don't need to poke them out, otherwise I have to just turn them around and poke them back in again. So I'm just going to kind of leave the bag the way it is. Now I want to make sure also, because I want, this is on the outside, this is the front of my bag. So when I open up my bag, I have to think about this kind of a little bit backwards. When I open up the bag, this side is going to be what is, like this side is going to be what's looking at me. So if I want my zipper to be what is looking at me, that has to be at the back of the bag. Hopefully I explained that properly. So when I put my lining inside, I'm going to have the backs of the bag all together. I need to make sure that my zipper is out of the way. So in order to to pin this in place, I'm going to line up my corners. So I want to line up the seams as best I can. Even if things aren't everything isn't perfect and lined up, I'm not worried about that because I'm going to use a seam allowance that's big enough that it's going to incorporate everything. I have a really, I'm sticking out quite a bit. I'm going to have to make a judgment call. And this, I don't know if I can explain this. This is sticking up. I'm going to pull this down a little bit so that it's not, so there isn't such a huge difference. I mean, there it's expanded a little bit too much and it's exaggerated. But if I push that down a little bit, I don't have such a huge difference in the height. Sometimes when you're easing stuff in, you have to kind of steal a little bit from one way and steal a little bit from the other and kind of make a compromise somewhere in the middle. And you can see my lining is a little bit bigger. As I sew, I'm going to ease that in if I need to. Or by the time I'm done clipping all of this together. Okay, so I've got some pretty major thicknesses in some of these spots because, again, I've used vinyl. I'm going to be very careful when I'm sewing this around. Make sure that I haven't skipped stitches. I'm going to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All the way. So now I have my lining sewn in all the way around. Now I'm going to just show you here. I've caught everything in here, and if I turn this around, I mean, this looks like a real mess because things aren't lined up, and that's just because of my pattern pieces. Just one thing to note. If your pattern pieces, I don't know how to explain this, if your pattern pieces if everything isn't always perfect, don't automatically blame the designer of the pattern, because everybody cuts things out differently. If you use quilting rulers, if you're used to that, of course your cutting will probably be much more precision. Just because this stuff, I mean, I don't blame this on the designer. I blame it on that I have altered my pattern, and that's why things haven't lined up for me. My zipper here, I haven't sewn that in quite right, so I've got a little bit more seam allowance for my zipper than I maybe should. It sticks out a little bit. All of those little things, in the grand scheme of things, aren't going to matter, as long as I make allowances for them as I go along. So here again, from this side, oh, I mean, it looks like the dog's breakfast here. But when this gets turned out, as long as all my seams are nice and smooth and everything is caught in there, you're not going to notice it because it's going to be on the inside. So now, before we birthed this bag, and I realize now, it's the problem that happens to lots of us. I forgot to open my zipper. So before you sew your lining in, you probably want to open your zipper. Again, it's not the end of the world. You may have to kind of get some slack in here and open, grab your zipper pull and open it. It's certainly isn't a big deal. And then once you have it open a little ways, you can get your hand in there and actually open it up all the way. There we go. Okay, so that's all opened up, but I don't need to be there right now. So I have some extra stitching here. I typically, actually, I don't baste in my zipper first. So with having the straight stitch and not having the foam out of the seam allowance, what I'm going to end up doing is I've got 2 rows of stitching here. One, this inside the seam allowance is from my basting stitch. So I'm going to end up just pulling that out because I'm going to pull this down and I'm going to cut all of the foam out of that seam allowance that I possibly can. Because when I top stitch, I don't want to go through all of that foam, all of the layers of vinyl, all of the everything. So I'm going to take as much out of that as I can. I'm also now going to, especially in these corners, now I find for myself, like I'm going to trim all of this. I'm going to trim about half of this seam allowance off. I'm going to trim more in the corners, but I really want to be careful that I don't catch my stitching. So I'm going to start by cutting some of this out. I kind of end up doing kind of a C in these and then just cutting straight here. Once this is done, you can also notch. There's a little bit of a curve there, and you can notch that out, and it makes that curve a little bit smoother. But I'm just going to continue on clipping. So now we kind of have the moment of truth. I'm going to work on birthing this bag, turning everything through my inside pocket. And yeah, this is a process, and really all you can do is work at it gently, slowly. Get your husband to do it. There are other methods, I know, of doing this, but they only work on certain bags, on certain styles. This, I know, this method, I don't have to learn a bunch of different methods. I don't have to, and it works. So if I just continue at it, working slowly and just not putting too much pressure on things. Now I've got everything through, and I'm just going to work a little bit gently at getting the bottom corners of my bag. I had some comments yesterday on my Facebook, in my Facebook group, Friends of Debbie Hunker, about being able to see the stitching. Yeah, it's not you. That's the way it is. Vinyl very often is that way. I always try to use a darker thread. In this case, all I have of my Tex 30, which is what I prefer because of the strength of it, right at this moment, all I have is black and white. So I've chosen black for this because at least the shadow of the seam allowance will hide as much as possible. And now is probably the only time that I will ever notice the stitching showing at all. So I'm just going to just kind of keep working at this a little bit. Put my lining inside. I can, if I want to, I could sew the pocket, the bottom of the pocket up right now, and then put it in. I'm going to make sure that that everything is working the way that I want it to before I do that, though. And then I have to remember to go back and do that. Yes. I've forgotten that too, and then realize, oh hey, stuff is inside the bottom of my bag. So yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of gently work. I can put my hand still through the bottom hole and get everything lined up, pushed out. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get all of this in place, and I'm going to get it all clipped and get it ready to do the top stitching on it.